Hey everybody, Lee Pavey, NYP Coaching here. And today I want to talk about the recent incident at the Oscars where Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. And what can we learn from this as leaders and as emotionally aware human beings? And I run men's groups, and in one of my men's groups, we discussed and processed what happened and what it kind of says to us about masculinity and being a man, especially when it pertains to, our family and what it means to look after them. And one of the men shared with me that his initial reaction to this was, good on Will Smith for protecting his wife. And then he had a conversation with his wife about it. And she pointed out to him how, in fact, this was the opposite. If it was her, she would feel like she should be able to respond and she should be able to share and speak to Chris Rock and let Chris Rock know her displeasure, rather than needing the white knight of her male partner to come in and to protect her from what was not a physically threatening situation. It was just, at worst, a poor joke. And I think what is important here is to realize that we as men believe we have this societal role of protection. And historically we have. Yet in the world we find ourselves in now, in most instances, we're not called to do that. And yet we still have this primal urge to do it. And what does that mean for us? And how does that play out? And how are you acting as a man? Are you jumping in to protect people that don't need to be protected? And thereby disempowering them. And then if we look at the instance in itself, and as I said, at worst, it's a poor joke. I don't know. I think Chris Rock has said that he didn't actually know that Jada had alopecia, and it was more a comment on her haircut style than her having alopecia. And we can see from Will Smith's behavior in the whole thing that there's a lot more going on for him than just this comment alone. And I've watched a couple of body language experts kind of dissecting what's happened, and they're talking about kind of how emotionally charged Will Smith is. And it's okay. Like, as human beings, we're going to have experiences that create an emotional charge with us, whether that be anger, fear, sadness, or joy. It's what we then choose to do next. So a lot of the work that I do with people is helping them have those choices. So instead of us being reactive, which is what happened to Will Smith, he hears the joke. Initially, he laughs. Then he looks at his wife. He sees her disappointment, and something stirs in him that he has to go and protect her. Instead of allowing her to respond, and she could have done that in the moment, or she could have written a post about it afterwards and actually used that to empower others with alopecia and show why this joke to her was so hurtful. Instead, he rushes in and he reacts. And there's not that moment where he stops and thinks about the consequences of what's going to happen. And yet, when we actually watch the video, that's what you see from Chris Rock. Will Smith slaps him. Chris Rock goes to respond, kind of bites his tongue, and goes, I could say something, and I'm not going to. And he's already weighing up the ramifications. He's already aware of how this is going to play out, and he's figuring it out incredibly quickly. And he's aware that this is going to be something that's going to be really talked about. This is going to be something that's going to be huge. And how he responds right now is going to say dividends about him and could provide an example of how we respond under these situations, which I think what he did. He could have easily been violent in response. He didn't. He chose to be thoughtful, and then he chose to move on. And this is what I think we can learn from this. We can learn from this that all of us are capable of having emotional reactions and responding or reacting poorly. And all of us are capable of having an emotional reaction and then moving to what do we want to do and how do we want to respond. And there's a concept that I work with that I've got from a coach called Jim Defmer, which is above and below the line. Below the line is our emotional response to any situation, any kind of triggering moment or any kind of emotional stimulus. we react. We have an emotional reaction. We're all going to have that, however big or small that emotional reaction is, however cognizant to it we are or not, it's going to happen. So we have the reaction, and then the above the line is, what am I going to choose to do with this reaction I've had? Am I going to go and choose to slap somebody over what they've said? Or am I going to sit here and go, that hurt? Does my wife need some support right now? Do I need to speak to her? Does I need to speak to this person? Could Will Smith have shared the anguish that caused him in a moment, the pain that he can see in his wife's face, instead of just resorting to physicality, which has backlashed on him enormously? He's now facing all of these repercussions from his actions there, because in that moment he wasn't able to stop himself and go, how do I want to respond? What is the bigger picture that I'm seeing here about this instance? And he could have, if he'd been able to, stop himself, slow himself down, think about how he really wants to respond and the impact that he wants to have, especially for somebody like him that can have such a huge impact with so many people that would listen to what he said. And in this instance, I think what we learned from this is he didn't do that. He stayed in his reaction, and we see that Chris Rock didn't. Chris Rock had a physical reaction. He got hit around the face. You can see it. You can see the range of emotions he goes through immediately after that, the shock, the anger, kind of the sadness. And then he very wisely chooses how he wants to respond to it. So if you want to know more about this, reach out to me, and this concept of above and below the line and how we are able to have an emotional response, and then we get to choose. We consciously get to choose how we're going to respond to that. If you find yourself being very reactive, it's a common thing for you. Something happens, you blame other people, then you react. We can work on that. That's something that you can change. Comment below, reach out to me. Love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody.